Welcome to the Tricord Advisors podcast, where we answer life's hard questions to help you make smart decisions with your money. I'm Jeremiah Lee, and this is Randy Barkley. We're both certified financial planners. I'm also a California licensed attorney. All right, today we're talking about college. Paying for college, going to college.
Well, that's right. I'm done with it.
You're done. Hey, yeah, you should be excited.
But you still have a whole bunch.
I have 4 children, and we'll see. So today we're talking about kind of the traps. I mean, we're in August here, and so as people are getting ready to send their students back to college, what are some of the traps? What are some of the things that people have to be careful of? What are some of the opportunities in the financial perspective? What can you do to tune this out? But kind of before we jump into that, we kind of had a thought, and I think just as a good thought for everyone, was like, is college even worth it?
Right.
You know,
what's the cost benefit?
Yeah.
And tuition, and tuition is just part of it. You got, if they live on campus, they got room and board. You got travel if they're out of the area, if they're in state, out of state, public school, private school. These are questions that need to be answered because it's a big deal.
Yeah, and some of it, which we've talked about before, I mean, some of college is just expanding your thinking.
Right.
General ed courses, people, reading Plato for the first time, or Rousseau, or something like that. Like, they're just simply expanding their Rousseau, the French philosopher on political structures of how we organize. But part of it's just expanding your thinking, right? And that's some of the value of college. Some of it is specific to a trade. I would not be able to be an attorney if I didn't go to law school.
Right.
That's part of the process.
You couldn't be a dentist without going to dental school.
So some of it
things
leads
like that
directly into a career that's going to make you, ideally, more money than it costs to do it. And then the third piece is kind of just the social development. I mean, being out on your own at that age, interacting with friends, depending on what high school you went to, there's a lot of people who came out as a valedictorian, kind of a big fish in a small pond. They jump into these major universities and realize everyone was a valedictorian.
They're all 4.0 plus,
yeah,
right?
And then having to find yourself and find your own footing in a new environment is useful. So I think there's more, but those are 3 really good values of college. However, there's other people that go to college and don't really expand their thinking, and they don't have a clear career path.
Yeah, I mentioned to all my children, I said, college is a very expensive place to experiment. And again, you want to have the experience of the education, you want to grow and such, but to be bouncing around and changing your majors, particularly in your 3rd and 4th year, it's horribly expensive.
Yeah.
And that's why most students now go to 5 years. I mean, it's 5 years to get your degree. And I was fortunate that all 3 of my children, they got through in 4. And they all took a different path. And they all, I guess the best way to say that is that the conversation that we started with our children is that we started when they were in high school. And we're not talking their senior year. We're talking more like sophomore, junior year, really trying to do aptitude, understanding what their skill sets were, and what would college benefit them moving forward, right?
Yeah. And some of your kids, you have 3 children. Some of them went to private schools. Some of them went to public schools. Some of them kind of weave through schools, to kind of get through the whole thing. And I have 4 children, all below college age. But I anticipate a similar thing, that these conversations. So that's probably a good, transition point to say some of the things that you need to consider when sending your kids to college. And one I think is, you talked about having it earlier, is just a conversation about expectations with your student.
Right.
And even if it's their 2nd or 3rd year in college, but or it's 2 years before college, the expectations of working hard, the expectations, are they going to also have a job during school? Who's going to pay
What's the budget? What's the budget going in, right?
Yeah, is there even a budget?
Right.
I imagine a lot of people just have access to a credit card, and then it just creates strife to say, well, why you have a meal plan? Why are you eating out at Subway when I gave you
3
that
times
meal
a
plan?
week?
Right. Or whatever it may be. Why'd you go to a fancy restaurant? You didn't do anything fancy. You're in college. Those conversations, to have them on the back end is a lot of stress and turmoil, but to have them before, like the way that, for me personally, the way my parents structured it is I went to a state school, and they were able to pay for my tuition, but I had to figure out room and board and living. And so I worked.
So your experience was, okay, mom and dad is going to pay for my books, my units. But other than that,
they'll write the big check that goes to the school, right? And
but after that, if you lived on campus, you'd have to pay for that. If you lived off campus, you'd have to pay for that.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean,
and that was our
your expense,
arrangement.
right?
And whether that is a good or bad arrangement, I think the clarity was really useful. My parents were able to say, here's what we'll provide or able to provide, and here's what we expect. If you want to do this is what you need to bring to the table. And I knew that I had to work through school. I knew, what that was going to be. and my living expenses were my own budget. And so if I was making X amount of dollars through waiting tables, or I did some soccer coaching, whatever I did to get through the different years, I knew that those ends had to meet. So I had to live on a budget. So the first one I think is just having good expectations.
Right.
The second is just really adding up the costs. And this is probably the difference between a first year parents with a freshman and parents with a junior in college. Of what room and boards, or what tuition's going to be, what your books are likely going to be.
Now, again, let's kind of back up. Now, there's a lot of, and this is really unfortunate that a lot of students don't know the scholarships and grants and the merit scholarships. In other words, you don't know that until you've actually applied and almost to the point of entry. And that's hard for plan if you don't know those numbers, right?
Yeah, and some of those scholarships are national that you can apply wherever you go. There's a number of scholarships that are simply to that school. Someone gave an endowment for students who are, of a certain major or a certain background, that only they get to apply to those. So getting into a school and starting to apply for that school specific aid is key. But also knowing, if you take a class that has a lab, like a biology class, sometimes there's a lab fee, an extra $300 or something. And part of the issues is just knowing the actual costs. And often when you're looking at a school, the costs that the parents are looking at for the freshman year are actually probably too low. There's a little bit more of just cost. You may have a meal plan, but your kids may find that they eat out at the local cafe, more often than they thought they would.
And that's become part of their social network. I mean, it's people they interface with, and it's not. And sometimes it's more than just having a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
And
study groups. You stay out late and get coffee. The other one that is good to kind of consider is your student's account, their tuition, their loans. Like when students turn 18, there's no longer a assumption that the parents have full access to all these things. And we were just talking beforehand. I don't remember if my parents had access directly to my student
mine
account.
Didn't, and I'm going back decades before you, but I think my parents did the same thing that you're talking about. They paid for the tuition, they paid for the the basics. Everything else, I mean, I had to get a job on campus in order to pay for some of my other extracurricular stuff.
And for a parent to be able to look in and say, hey, the tuition was paid, we have confirmation of that, and we realize there's 3 loans that are available, but we decided not to take them, or this is what the grades were last semester. Those items, my understanding is that those can all be made available to parents. And I think it's a great one to have that visibility so that you can have those appropriate conversations with the kids. Because I mean, a risk there also is if everyone's making it, right? If you're paying the bills, you're paying tuition, everything's working out, but you're offered some of these loans, do you take them? Do you not? And that's a big, scary question with all sorts of repercussions.
It's a horrible dilemma, because if you have a child that's been accepted to a very good school and they're good academically and they're a good child, you want to reward their behavior and you want them to do well in school. But parents have this daunting amount that they have to deal with. I mean, private school out of state it's an enormous amount of money.
Well, one of the articles you read, just ballpark, it could be $300,000 to get a kid through school. And for a parent to say, where am I going to come up with $300,000? And the reality is, I found for most of our clients we work with, there's earnings along the way.
Right.
There's the kids can work. There's some scholarships, hopefully some grants, and there's also some loans. But a key item that parents, this is one of the traps that we'll talk about, is pulling out retirement money to say, well, where am I going to get it? I got to pull from my retirement, or I got to take on these Parent Plus loans.
And that's where you sit down and do the financial planning. This is why it's critically important that way before the child enters school, because we've had clients who have called us up at the last minute and say, I need $20,000, I need $30,000. I'm going, this is way too late. We should have been talking about this, and we have, but it's been a reluctant conversation because the child kind of drove the discussion, and they said, this is what I want. And the parent kind of succumbed to it. And I went, this is not the right partnership.
Well, and I like that word partnership. That's huge, to say that the kid, the child, and the parents are basically taking on a partnership to get through the university. And it's not a mommy and daddy paid for my school.
Right.
That may be the outcome, but the partnership aspect is, I think, key to say, okay, we are working together as a family unit to move this child forward.
Right.
That might financially involve them working. It might not. it's definitely going to involve them working hard in their classes, of trying to do academically well.
So the balance is really important, and I
Yeah.
think it's what's critical in the planning stage that we sit down and determine from the parent standpoint how much money have they started at 529. Now, again, in your junior or senior year, that's too late.
Yeah.
You should have started when the child was first born.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, my oldest grandchild, we started setting aside $100 a month into a 529. There's advantages of 529. We can talk about that on an individual basis, but we just felt as that's kind of our gift to our granddaughter, and she's now entering into college. That $100 a month is going to pay for almost her first year.
Wow.
And
now she's going to a private university.
She's going to a private school in state, but with the grants and the other awards and other things, it's the merit scholarships she got, that plus the the distribution from the 529, she's going to get through her first year. Wow. It's all going to be paid for.
That's great. And so you think of her parents, then her direct parents, to say, what was a daunting 4 years just became a 3 years.
Right.
And knowing that child, she'll probably be working at times, and it's a huge, I think, benefit then to think early, right? And that didn't even come from her parents. That was from a grandparent, right, planning. And
well, again, because my life is finance.
Yeah.
So I started looking at the cost of education, and I put three. I made a large contribution to all three of my children in their schooling, so I know what the cost, and that had gone up significantly. Yeah. Every year. It seems like it's higher than inflation. It's just the cost of education. And depending upon where the child goes, the costs can be just overwhelming, right?
That's right. Well, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We have some traps and opportunities as far as college comes up. So come back. We'll finish this conversation. All right, welcome back. We're talking about college and kind of the dynamics of that. And so we're going to move on to a little bit of the traps and the opportunities.
Traps and opportunities. So, traps, I think, are really important because obviously a trap is something you don't see or don't recognize until after it's happened, right?
Yeah. So some of the first ones is when you send your kid off to college, they're great, they're excited, they're moving into their dorms, they're doing these things. And a trap is not having any sort of budget or not having any sort of tracking of expenses. Just there's a pool of money here. I hope it's enough.
I hope it works out.
And I feel like that's kind of a fear-based mindset, not wanting to get into the details because I don't know if the ends are going to meet and I don't want to know that, versus, shifting that from that kind of fear mindset to, we'll talk about this a few times, but kind of the opportunity of this is the first time for a lot of folks where that child is out of the house. They're more responsible for their own finances, their own, getting food, going to class, all those things. It's really a great opportunity to help teach them about money. Whatever they've learned through high school, it's a new thing. And so I always see the idea that people, kids are on their phones. They're going to pay friends through their phones. They're probably going to pay at stores through their phones, and just leaning into that, not saying, here's a paper budget, I need you to fill this out, but rather saying, what apps are out there that will help you track your spending, help you track your budgeting. Like Mint is a great one.
Yeah. And again, kids now have so much more information in their hand with the phone. And, I didn't have that when I was going through. Mine was all, pen on paper.
Yeah. Which is a great way to do it. But I think with kids these days, they may lean into the technology aspect of it. So, Quicken, there's a number of apps that will track stuff. Mint is one we use that you can link your credit cards and debit cards and all the bank accounts to one app, and it will auto categorize your spending. This is food, this is entertainment, this is, fuel, and allowing a kid in essence, in a safe environment to say, okay, month by month, you've got X amount of dollars to deal with. How are you, month by month or quarter by quarter, semester by semester, however it's broken down, but to really view that not as something to shy away from a budget, but to say this is probably their first real opportunity to really lean into a budget. And with some, it's easy for them to fail in a safe environment. If they run out of money 3 days before the end of the month, mom and dad can give them an extra $40 rather than them being late on their rent and getting kicked out of their apartment in real life. So it's a great moment. It's a good opportunity. So the first trap, I think, is no budget, no tracking expenses, just hoping for the best.
And you need to review that periodically. It's not out at the beginning. I would think that either, every 2 or 3 months or whatever, you just have a conversation, say, how are you doing? What's going on? And you get kind of a clarity as to the spending and the income that's coming in, or whatever the resource is for that, right?
Yeah, that's great. The second is, I think, parents just pulling money from retirement qualified retirement accounts because they're not sure what else to do.
Oh my goodness. Right. So expensive. If you're below age 59 and a half, that becomes so expensive. You can borrow in some cases from like a 401k plan or a 403b, but you still have to pay it back. And it just adds an incredible amount of burden on top of a family.
And even that comment, there's a number of layers here. So number one, worst idea is just take out more than you absolutely need. Just take out a big lump sum from your retirement saying, I'm probably going to need about 50 grand. I'll just pull out 50 grand today. Just pull the whole thing out. Well, if you're under 59 and a half, you're going to get taxed on that money because it becomes taxable income to you. So add that on whatever.
And then if you're below age 59 and a half, there's an excise, there's a penalty.
There's a 10% penalty on top of that. And so if you're in a 20%, we'll just pick a 20% tax bracket plus the penalty, that's a 30% of that money that just disappeared before it even gets to your account. And your retirement may or may not be suffering. So that's the first, bad choice. The one that's just below that, I say, I'm going to take a loan. You don't hit the penalties. You don't have the tax impacts. It's just a loan from your own 401k. When you pay it back, that interest goes back into your own account. So there's it's a better move. The concern is if you change jobs, if you just don't pay it back.
And you can't borrow from your IRA. So if you have an IRA, and there's a lot of retirement plans that you can't borrow from. So, and the repayment is pretty steep. You have to pay it back within basically about 60 months.
5 years is
5 years.
General idea. So you have to start making payments of that. And the key thing is if you were to change jobs in that time, you usually have to pay it back entirely.
Right.
So that'll put you in a big bind. If you don't pay it back, it counts as a distribution. The third comment I guess I'll make on that is for most people who have in their head, I'm just going to take a big lump sum out. When you really sit down and look at the details, there's other options there. And one option even just being take what you absolutely need. If that's the only way to pay that $5,000 bill or $20,000 bill for that semester, if you have to maybe take that, but don't take a big chunk just because you want to sit there.
Right.
So that's a trap for sure. And we can talk more about that with individual people. The other one is financial aid. A lot of colleges will offer you financial aid.
And this is a big deal, and you want to get as much information. In fact, we have a book, a recommendation. There was a book, an article that we read. It's called The Price You Pay for College. It's by Ron Lieber. Now, I personally haven't read this book, but I've read commentary on it. I've read some excerpts from it, and it's current. That's what I like about this, it's current. But one of his comments in there, he says, whatever the tuition is on public schools, he said, typically what you end up paying is about 52% of that. So because with all the aid and the grants and the scholarships and all the merit, the merit things that come in, typically it's a lot less. So whatever you see, and we have software, we sit down with clients and we have software we can plug in and get an idea of what college, no matter where the college is, out of state, in state, public, private, and get an idea of what that cost is going to be. And we put an inflationary factor out. So we get a pretty good idea of what it is.
And that's the target. And then to say, and I think that's a great comment, to say most people don't actually pay that big number.
Right.
There's merits, there's scholarships. The concern that I think the trap for folks is they get in there and, hey, they're offering us this grant or this scholarship. Should we just take it just so we have it?
Right.
And there's some wisdom. It's case by case. There's some wisdom saying, hey, we might need the money. Let's take it. The trap is that you take the money you maybe didn't necessarily need, but you actually spend it on things you didn't need also.
Right.
It kind of gets mushed away to say, where did that really go? Well, I guess you
can't track it.
I ate out more than I thought, and I used that money for that a little bit, or I got new clothes. And so that is the risk. You've taken more loans than you really needed to, because then when you graduate, that bill becomes due either to the parents or the children, now young adults, and they have to carry that forward. So that's the other trap. I think that this last one here for traps is just interesting, is apartment and living. A lot of times when kids are living, they're in dorms, but they'll move out into apartments. And often they'll figure out themselves. They'll negotiate leases. They'll talk with landlords. It's kind of like
growing up a little bit.
Yeah, which is important, right? Important to let them do that. But there's also a comment to saying, a parent or a family friend who's an attorney or a real estate agent, just to take a little once over the lease, just take a little look at it and make sure to say, okay, what is the child going to come home for the summer? And they need to keep their apartment. Are they going to try and get out of the lease at the summer? What if they find a better apartment? What if, is there security deposit issues?
What is it that you need to know that are the negatives?
Yeah. And some parent who's been through, 10 different leases in their life would have a much better sense than someone who's doing their very first lease. So that's one just to look at is leases. A couple of opportunities we wanted to mention, we mentioned it once before, is for most college students, this is their first best opportunity to really get some healthy money habits.
Right.
And so for parents not to view it as, this high stress, horrible moment of, angst of money and almost imparting their money angst onto the kids, but to really try and let them start fresh with a healthy perspective of that money is a resource and money is a tool. And we need to be stewards of it. And how can we best do that? And helping them create a budget that makes sense for them, has some hang out with friends money in there, things like that. And then empowering the kid to track it, to, develop some healthy habits, and even savings in the midst of college to say, what savings account does the kid have? And most people think, well, there's no savings, they're paying, but they need an emergency fund. They need a backup plan.
In the attitude of working either on campus or off campus, there's a lot of opportunity, particularly right now. I mean, if you're going to school, unemployment is at a very, very low ebb. So there's going to be jobs that are available, whether it be restaurants or fast foods or whatever. I think it's interesting that there should be a desire for the child, the student, to make some money. I think that's really important. And they put that in their account and they manage it, right?
Yeah.
Because first of all, they get a realization of taxes. So, so if you make $20 an hour, what you actually get in your bank account is not 20, it's probably closer to 15.
Yeah. Well, it's good, like you said, a student coming out of college saying, hey, I got this new job, Dad. I'm going to make $40,000.
Which seems incredible,
yeah, it's
right?
a huge amount of money. And then realizing after you pay taxes, okay, it's not quite as exciting as I first thought it was. Dad, I'm gonna finish school like we talked about, and I'm gonna get a job that pays
right
me
on.
that. Yeah, and I think that's a key aspect of letting them feel some of that weight. There's also an element to say encouraging them to work hard in their studies. Of if the parents looking at each kid, okay, I need to take some of that burden off to allow them to just focus on studies. But for a lot of kids, it's both, and life is all of that, right? You're doing a lot of stuff.
It really is. So again, preparation for college should not be a moment just before they enter into school. It should be a time that you really do some plannings and some and talking with your child, but also getting an idea of what these costs are and how you're going to pay for them.
Yeah, this
is planning. This is the process of planning, right?
Yep, education planning is a big deal. If you missed any part of this conversation, you can find it on our website, tricorderadvisors.com. You can also find us on YouTube.
Until next week, folks. May you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.